It was blurry for a couple minutes. I remember waking up and I'd been asleep for about 4 or 5 hours while they did that fourth surgery on my right leg. First year of high school. And up till then, I was convinced, despite what you see before you now, I was convinced that I could play football. And I was convinced that I would go all the way. I'd been a little bit taller, a little bit faster all through middle school than my peers. Freshman year, my growth stopped. Sophomore year, everybody passed me. But this was right before that. This was freshman year, first game of the season. I was still pretty good. I grew up watching the 49ers. And I know that you guys won't know too much about great quarterbacks and football and all that, but we had a guy named Joe Montana, and he threw to a guy named Jerry Rice, and I idolized Jerry Rice. I thought he was amazing, and so I practiced, and I actually got pretty good. I can catch most things thrown at me, and then this happened, game one of the season, and 4 surgeries later, I was sitting on a hospital bed, and a coach came and talked to me. He said, you could probably do this again, but it's going to take a lot of work. Plus, everybody's getting taller than you. Maybe you should consider soccer. And it was confusing for a bit. And I was 14, and everything was being reoriented in my head at this point. Now what do I do with my life? Everything that I've trained for just went to waste. All of those hours, all of the, watching videos, watching Jerry Rice, trying to talk like Jerry Rice, like all these things that would go into being a football player were gone. And sometimes that's just the way that life goes. Sometimes that's where you find yourself on a bed with somebody telling you your future is actually not what you thought it would be. It's different. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's certainly not what you thought. And so with that, we jump into our story today. And if you've joined us just today, or if you haven't remembered what we've been doing, we're in Exodus, a journey of becoming. And this is actually week 4. We thought we would only do 4 weeks, but last week we had to add one because of the storm, and I was off at a party at Great Wolf Lodge. So if you remember week 1, Pastor Phil, chapter 1 of Exodus, Israel has all moved their family into Egypt because of famine in Canaan. Do you guys remember that chapter? They grew. They became mighty. They increased in numbers. The Egyptians oppressed them. They became slaves. God sent a baby named Moses to free them. That baby grew up. He became a man. He became a murderer. We didn't cover that part of the story, did we? He became a murderer. He had to run away. God sends him back about 80 years later, and he says, I need you to free my people. Moses goes back. 10 plagues later, they all walk out, 2 to 3 million in number, into the desert in Sinai, following a pillar of cloud and fire. I don't know if we covered that part either. But that's when we come into this season where they cross a sea. God splits the water. They walk into it, following the cloud, following the fire. And they come to this place where they're just learning how to be a people. They're learning how to live as non-slaves. And that's where we come to chapter 18, week 2. Pastor Karen, and she talked to us about emerging leadership and how in the process of becoming the people of God, they needed to identify their gifts. They needed to see what they were made of. They needed to realize how God had designed them and then step into those roles that they needed to fill. So Moses distributed the people into groups, and he said, you and you and you, you're trustworthy. I need you to take on these cases. I need you to arbitrate. I need you to be leaders among the people and only bring the difficult cases to me. And then time goes by. We get 10 Commandments. We get a Mount Sinai. And then we get Moses gone. Moses disappears for about 40 days and 40 nights. And the people start thinking, where is this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt? He's gone. They go to Aaron and they say, we need a God that we can see. We need a God that we can follow. We need a God that we can manage and have control over. This God with pillar and fire that just comes and goes, vanishes out of nowhere, we can't quite follow that. That's a little too much for us. That's a little too much faith. That's a little too much trust. We can't do that if we don't see God clear as day in some sort of a shape that we can control. Then we're not in. So Moses says, fine, give me your gold, silver, throws it in a fire. He crafts a calf out of gold, and they throw a party. It's not a meeting-themed party. That's why God gets angry at them. And he says, Moses, go back down. These people are running wild. They have betrayed me. They've betrayed you. Everything that we did, everything that we said, everything that we've done up to this point is now gone. They are worshiping a golden calf. Moses says, chill out. I will talk to them for you. Don't forget that you promised them a land. So God says, fine, I'll back off. You go talk to them. Moses goes down, 2 tablets in hand, 10 commandments written across both of them. He sees the people, and he forgets all of his pleading for them. He smashes the tablets at the foot of the mountain. He takes the golden calf, grinds it up into powder, puts it in water, makes all the people drink it. I think you guys may have covered some of this last week, those of you that were here despite the storm and all that, and despite the party at Great Wolf. He made them drink the golden calf. And then he killed 3,000 of them. I don't know if you guys covered that part. But Moses goes through. He takes all the Levites. He says, go through the camp with your swords. They kill 3,000 of the Israelites that day. And then Moses says, okay, stop. I'm going to go talk to God for you. He goes back up. He talks to God. And that's where we are today. This is the conversation that God has with Moses when you're sitting at the foot of the bed and you don't see clearly. You can't quite see through the wilderness as clearly as you would like to see. And so Moses says this to God. If you're following in your Bibles, I see, look at that. There's a Bible right there. Chapter 33, verse 12 is where we are. And here goes Mo. God, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and I have found favor with you. If you really are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so that I may know and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. What is Moses asking God for? What's the heart of the question? Or the request? What does Moses want? Guidance, right? He says clearly, what is it? Show me, right? Show me your ways. He's looking for guidance specifically, right? Have you been there where you just sit there and life doesn't look quite so clear? And what do you ask God for? You ask God for guidance. You want to see God more clearly. And so God replies with this, verse 14, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And that feels good. Like, that's the answer you want. And there are times when that's the answer that you get, right? But even in those times, when God says, my presence will go with you, I will show you my ways, I'll give you guidance, I'll give you clarity. Like, even then, like, God's clarity it's not always crystal clear, right? Like, have you been through that process where you're trying to figure out, what is God doing in life? What is God doing in my family's life? What is God doing in my church or community? And you begin to see little hints and glimmers of what he's doing, but then putting it all together, gosh, that just doesn't come easy. Like, how rarely are we just satisfied with, oh, cool, you promise that you're going to go with me, everything's fine now. Like, that's not the way it goes, right? So Moses goes on. And he does this. Moses says to him, if you don't go with us, if your presence does not go with us, then don't send us up from here. Now remember, they're on a trajectory to this promised land flowing with milk and honey in Canaan, where they originally came from because it was famine, but then Egypt became a land of slavery. So they're heading back. They're trying to get there. They've been in the desert about 3 months at this point, and they're camped at the foot of a mountain. And they're trying to get to this place. Moses says to God, if you do not go with us, if you're not clear, if your presence isn't guiding us, if you're not the one in charge, if we can't see what you're doing, then just don't send us the rest of the way. Have you ever been there? Where you're more comfortable, more satisfied, even though God's brought you some of the way, and you've seen what he does, and you have a little bit of clarity, and you can kind of tell where he's going. If he just doesn't give you every single thing that you ask for, if he doesn't grant every request, if he doesn't give you clear as day answers, you simply say, I'd rather just not go. I'm done. This may not be the promised land. This may not be everything that God has in store for me. This may not be God's full plan, but man, it's better than just going on because I don't know where I'm going. Who's been there? And what does that feel like? I'd like to say that for me it felt disorienting at 14. But what I can really say is that at 37, I think so, it's still disorienting. I still don't know where he's taking me. He's given me hints and he's giving me pieces of it. But there is no way that he is done taking me somewhere. There is no way that he's done creating me into what he wants me to be. And I know that as a church, he's brought us to this place. But there's no way that he's done. And maybe we see some clarity now. Maybe we've got some pieces put together. But the worst thing we could do is say, we're going to stop here. This is it. Because I can't see where the next 38 years of this journey are going to go. I'm just going to stop. That's where Moses is. And then God says this. God says, I will do the very thing you have asked me for, because I am pleased with you. This is verse 17. I am pleased with you, and I know you by name. And even though God already said, I will guide you, and even though he said, I am pleased with you, and even though he said, I will go with you, you know that that's not enough, right? You know that when you start getting glimpses of who God is, you want to just keep going. You want to ask for more and get more clarity. So Moses finally drops this question. Fine. Your presence is great. Your guidance is great. But here's what I really want. Will you show me your glory? It's a Hebrew word for weight. It's a word that gives us a very physical, a very real, a very heavy God. Will you show me your glory? Moses is asking to see God literally as clearly as he could possibly see him. Knowing that God is with him, that's cool. Knowing that God's going to guide him, that's great. Having 10 commandments and 513 other laws of a Mosaic code, that's fantastic. But Moses says, that is not enough for me. I want to see your face clear, close, direct. I want a close-up of you. I want to see exactly who you are. I want to see everything that you are. I want to see where you're taking us, not just where you've taken us from. I want to see you clearly, face to face, no doubt, vivid. I want high definition Yahweh right in front of me. That's what I want. And here's God's answer to that. Verse 19, I will cause all of my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, Yahweh, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, no, you cannot see my face. No one can see my face and live. Then he says this. The Lord said, there is a place near me. You can stand on the rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of that rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I've passed. And then I will remove my hand, and you can see my back. How does that feel? I mean, is Moses asking for something bad? How many of us have asked God for more clarity? How many of us have asked God to just show us where he's going, what he's doing, and where he's taking us? How many of us, once God says, okay, I'll give you a hint, have said, actually, not only do I want to see where you're taking me, but will you promise to be with me? Right? We do that. Will you guide me? Will you give me strength? Will you help me get through this? Will you show me through the obscurity of the moment? Now that I can't be a pro football player, Will you show me instead what you want me to be? And God says, sure, I'll grant you that. But do we ever stop there? Don't we always say, and now I just want to see you fully, in your full glory splendor, everything that you are. And then God just says no. Have we been there? And how does that feel? The reason I do the stories this way is because I believe that the way that God dealt with people then is the way that God deals with people now. I think that the stories of the Bible that we get from them are the same stories playing out in our lives, individually and collectively. I think that these stories write out our own individual journeys, and not only individual journeys, but our journeys as a people, our journeys as this people of UCC Medfield that is becoming the people of God. That's the journey that we're on. And have we ever seen or experienced or started to look back on something that in the moment, it just wasn't great? In fact, in the moment, it was gut-wrenching. It made your heart sink. It was the worst news you could get. I'm not actually Jerry Rice. I will never set foot on a pro football field to catch a football. I can't run that fast anymore, and I'm not nearly tall enough to even play baseball. That's just not going to happen for me. And as I got that news, I thought, this sucks. This is horrible. What do I do now? And the thing I didn't think about then was that even though I was probably never actually even biologically destined to do that, and it wasn't really going to happen, the things that went with it through high school, those things likely were going to happen. And it wasn't just about being on a field. There was a lifestyle that went with being a California kid that played football. There was other things. There was a culture around it. And when I talk to people now that were with me on those teams back then, gosh, that is not at all what I want. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that God injured my leg so that I wouldn't go down that path, but the more I think about it and the more that I let it sink in and the more that I just think it through, I think, maybe, just maybe, what God was doing in my life then was setting me up to what God actually wants to happen in my life now. And even though it was murky, and even though it was painful, and even though it made no sense in my 14-year-old head, maybe now as I think back, I can see God really was working in that moment in ways that I never understood. And only looking back do I see that. And how often is it that as we ask God for more and more clarity, and He says, I'll show you a little bit, and I'll give you some guidance, we don't actually see the fullness of who God is until after He's already passed. In the moment, we don't get that face-to-face clarity. In the moment, we're wrapped up in stuff. In the moment, we're lamenting. In the moment, we're sad. In the moment, we're confused. In the moment, we're thinking, what in the world is going on? And then time passes, and you look back, and you see, oh, now I get what God was doing. Now I see how He was moving. Now I see the pieces that He was putting in place. Now I see what He was doing in my life, my kids' lives, my wife's life, my church's life. Why things had to change and move and evolve and transform. And even though it was painful then, and maybe even though it's painful now, we can be confident that at some point we can look back and say, I see what God was doing. And often it's not until after He's passed and we just see His back. So with that, 3 things and 2 questions. How do we wrap a chapter like that? I mean, it doesn't wrap up the chapter, actually it goes on, but I'm going to leave the ending off because we have a party to get to. But what do you do with that? How does that impact life? The first thing is to recognize, often we simply won't be able to tell what God is doing. We just won't. We can't see it sometimes. And it says that straight out. And to some degree, we will simply have to learn that God is God and we are not. couple other things to do. To be more in touch than we have been with what he's doing in the moment. I think there are a couple things to do. One of them is actually just ask him boldly. I mean, often I pray, and my prayers are so compromised almost. Do you guys put the word just in your prayers a lot? Like, God, would you just do this? And I pray that you just do that. Like, it's so weird, right? That's a weird thing to say. Moses just said, God, would you just show me? Show me your face. I want to see your face. And if you say no, that's fine. But if you say yes, that's great. I'm going to ask you, show me your face. It's really strange how we talk to God really differently than we talk to other people. Like Kirsten ever comes to me and says and starts talking to me in the subjunctive tense. Like, Arturo, I ask that you would do the dishes tonight. She said, Archie, can you do the dishes? Like, it's really weird. We do this different formatting when we talk to God. God, we pray that you just would guide us, that you would just have mercy as we travel. We never just say, God, protect us when we travel. It's really strange. I think in this chapter there's something of a prescription. If you want to talk to God, just be forward and be direct. It doesn't mean that it's irreverent. It doesn't mean that you're somehow out of place. God wants you to just talk to him. I think that's one. The second thing to do is to surround yourself with in a context of people and activities that can help you see God directly. Our church has ministries for a reason. We fellowship together, we pray together, we worship together, we serve together. The reason those are there is because they're components of discipleship that help us connect with God. Ask the people around you what God might be doing in your life. And if you see God possibly working in somebody's life, tell them. It's something of a lost practice to tell people, I think God might be doing this in your life. And I know that that's the case in this social context, but it was the case in the context where I came from. It's a rare thing where you honestly and openly talk to each other about what God is doing. I think we need to start doing that. So 3 recommendations. 1, realize we're not always going to see it. Sometimes we just won't get what God is doing. Number 2, be direct with God and just ask him. Number 3, talk to people around you. And then to close out, 2 questions. They're in your communication card. And I'm going to give you a few seconds to think this through. But here's the question I want to leave you with. What might God be doing at our church that you had not realized was part of his plan? What might God be doing at UCC Medfield that was confusing? It was painful. Maybe it was joyful. But we just hadn't realized, oh, this is a piece of the journey that God is taking us on. I think we should think about that. I think it's helpful if we think about that together. So I'll leave you with that question.